We power internet infrastructure for some of the largest companies in the world and some of the smallest and fastest growing ones. Sort of everybody wanted to be America. But China, what it felt different was that they wanted to beat America. It was incredulous to us on why is it that you had these great models sitting there and software could be better, but nobody was doing anything. If somebody told us something like GPT-4 would be available in 2014 by 2024, we would say the world would have changed entirely. Where I see it all going is personalization of software will actually happen. Why Tesla is literally the only company actually taking action in the real world with models. One Christmas, we just decided we're just going to move to San Francisco. I think both of you know one of the greatest things about San Francisco, especially a decade ago, was that you could literally cold email anyone and people would respond. Did you imagine Microsoft to be this successful?
Yeah, let me just stop you. Absolutely not.
Have you considered a career in podcasting? You are so good at this. You should just join us. We can call it the Aarthi, Sriram and Anil show.
This is an episode with two surprises. We have with us today a longtime friend, Anil Varanasi. Anil is the founder of a company called Meter. If you don't know about them, trust me, you are probably using them right now. They power a lot of the networking infrastructure that makes the internet work as it should. Now, it turns out that they are also one of the most innovative companies when it comes to designing experiences around what AI should look like. And in this conversation today, Anil walks us through his amazing history with him and his brother. They have quite the unique childhood. They talk to us about his company and how they're pushing the frontiers of AI. He shows us a fun little demo. But here's the two surprises. First, him and his brother have a fantastic eye for finding and supporting great people. And we talked to him about how they do that, what are the signifiers of great young people, and stories about how they have supported some people you and I know really well, like Dwarkesh Patel. But the real surprise is about a third of the way left in the episode. Anil turns the tables on Aarthi and me and starts asking us questions, things that we haven't been asked before, and it actually led to some very surprising places. Anil is one of a kind, and you are going to have a delight watching this episode. Enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting episode for you here today. And someone you may not have heard from or seen before, and trust me, that's going to change starting today, and you're going to see this person everywhere. As Paul Heyman says in WWE, that's not a prediction, that's a spoiler. We have the one and only Anil Varanasi. Now, Anil is the founder, and along with his brother, have built one of the most exciting networking companies. And that might sound like an oxymoron, but Anil's going to talk to you about why networking is the sexiest thing out there. But this is not just a conversation of somebody in Silicon Valley who has built an interesting company. There's definitely a part of it. But Anil is one of the most thoughtful and helpful people you can meet. And when I was preparing for this episode, I spoke to so many people, very well-known figures in Silicon Valley, who had stories and questions and anecdotes about Anil, which you want to get into. And he is incredibly hard and elusive to pin down for this conversation. I remember talking to him about 5 years ago to do this. And so we finally made this happen. After 5 years, Anil Varanasi, welcome to the show.
Welcome,
Hey,
welcome, Anil.
Aarthi, Sriram, thank you for having me.
All right. Okay, so we're going to get into networking and why networking may be some of the most interesting piece of software to be built out there. But I also think we're going to talk about how you guys are at the cutting edge of how user interface with AI is going to work. There's a lot of fun stuff there. I think you're one of the most thoughtful pieces on talent, which I want to get into. But since it's probably the first time we're having this conversation, I want to get into your origin story. So tell us a little bit about you, your brother, where you grew up, and how you got here in the first place.
Yeah, my brother and I grew up in Hyderabad until I was 12, he was 14. And then our family moved to Northern Virginia, seemingly for all the random reasons immigrants move a certain place, which is they had friends there. And that's like the biggest reason. But probably the fortuitous thing that happened to us in Northern Virginia is one, we were next to this eclectic school called George Mason, and I'm happy to go into like the history of it and why GMU is so interesting. And then two is HHMI, Genelia being like 20 minutes from where we grew up. And then three, about 70 to 74% of all internet traffic goes through Northern Virginia for a lot of different reasons. So in India, in Hyderabad, the Northern Virginia, we went to college there. We started a company there. But I feel incredibly fortunate to have like landed there. Some sort of like Mayflower Plymouth thing for us, but in Northern Virginia.
So I'm curious, like, talk to us a little bit about your parents and your upbringing, because you folks had, I would say, an interesting childhood, and I kind of think your parents treated you a little differently than a lot of your parents treat their kids.
Yeah, we were fortunate on a few things. One, our parents were busy themselves. They had actual careers. They were super busy. So we didn't have any of the helicopter parenting and things like that. But I think a couple of things beyond that where they were very open to and kind of pushed towards is what one of our common friends, Sriram, calls free range kids, which is Hinkie's line. I think we were basically allowed to do anything possible as long as we didn't hurt each other or somebody else growing up. And I think especially you guys grew up in India like me, you do just get to like go and do whatever you want all the time. There are no restrictions.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of seeped over even when we moved to America, and that was incredibly fortunate for us. But the other thing I think they did that was very deliberate is since I was like 10 or 11 years old, I was always treated like an adult, which was very different than when I went over to my friend's house for dinner or something like that, compared to how their parents treated us and treated them versus how my parents treated us. When my parents had dinner guests over, we were part of the table. We argued books. One of my dad's cousins is a professor, and he tells this like, endearing story of him mentioning something in like, I forget if it was like chemistry or biochemistry or something. And suddenly the four of us just left the dinner table because we brought our own books to cite, saying,
Right.
This is the reason why I am right for all four of us. And none of us agreed with each other, which was also interesting. But I think we were always treated like adults. We were given any free reign to do. I think like decisions that were made were okay for us to make. It didn't have to be that an adult had to make a decision. People become adults much later than they used to.
Can I ask you, what is the defining line or behavior that you think makes someone an adult versus a child? Because I've heard this before, and I think about, for example, how someone like a Walt Disney was able to tap into his spirit of childhood for so long. Or if you look at Elon, there are so many things that he does which are childlike.
Sure.
And I think there is a part of modern life where our life expectancy is probably about like 50, 60 years over what it was 8,000 years ago. We have access to modern medical care. We live longer. And I sort of wonder whether what makes an adult versus not is just fundamentally different than what it used to be.
Yeah, but before we kind of get into it, in the United States, average life expectancy is going down, not up, and we can talk about that separately.
Oh wow, fact check. Okay, hold on. Look, like the vice presidential debate a couple of weeks ago. No one's allowed to fact check, Anil. Only we are. All right, okay, it's our show.
But maybe like to directly answer your question, I think of that as like something very simple, which is being okay with the consequences of your decisions. And that feels like culturally is pushed much later. Society makes decisions for you. Your parents make decisions for you. Culture make decisions for you. And by the time you make decisions, you own up to yourself. That seems like it's much later. I've been tracking literature. We don't have any longitudinal studies that I trust yet. But it just feels that way. And I think, one of the few places in the world that's not true is India. India still feels like it's good. People just go do stuff even when they're younger. And I think that's like bright for India because of that.
Well, okay. So on the theme of doing stuff when you're younger, right? I want to come back and tie this back to you and your brother.
Sure.
Because, you get raised in Indian origin household, but you go off, you folks are actually quite entrepreneurial. So could you just walk me through that journey? Like, because you guys have done some very, very interesting things, which I really want to get into.
Yeah, I think our first love was actually film. And we spent a lot of time making a lot of film. And we got really into it, like down to the fact that we had, a crew of ADs, and there's a lot of things we kind of were doing. And at one point we were kind of deciding if we should make film forever or we should actually build all the stuff we want in technology or not. And our calculus was, technology has a half-life, storytelling doesn't, and we can kind of do that later. But probably I think I'd give majority of the credit to my brother. He's arguably, one of the smartest people I've ever met, but incredibly kind. Down to the fact that if there were two of us, like there were two of me, one of us wouldn't have survived. It's that good that he's around. And, we've now been working together for 20 years. And I usually joke around that other than two prisoners that have shared a cell, there's not that many people that have spent more time together than me and my brother. And I think what kind of started is he's just like more of a tinkerer. And I think his greatest gift is the fact that he can just pick up and learn things on the fly. So we ended up building all sorts of things from electronics to software to film to music. And once we really got into film, we started kind of really thinking about what does physical theater design look like. And we started building those. Then I think we really got enamored with software, obviously around maybe 2003, 2004, mainly because of a lot of things we wanted to do in film needed better software. And, you kind of make your own plugins and Maya and Shake and all those things I remember back in the day. So it kind of started off that way. Then I think part of the entrepreneurial stuff that you're mentioning is in Northern Virginia, something like 40 to 50% of all households in Fairfax County and Loudoun County, which are the two of the highest per capita income counties in the country, at least one income in a household comes from working in the government. And so we were no different kind of growing up and hearing a lot of these conversations. And so we just started doing small RFPs for the local government. And I kind of just describe it as a video game that's like an MMO. You start beating a small boss and you beat a bigger boss over time. And that's kind of how it started.
There was a time when both of you sort of shipped yourself over to China and spent a bunch of time in factories over there. Why? What happened? And what did you learn from that?
So we deliberately wanted to start Meter, and we were trying to figure out how the city of 800,000 people figured out how to build products for 8 billion people. So we're like, is it in the water? Is it in the air? Whatever. So one Christmas, we just decided we're just going to move to San Francisco. So we get to SF. We didn't know anybody here. I think both of you know one of the greatest things about San Francisco, especially a decade ago, was that you could literally cold email anyone. And I mean the word literally in the actual sense, not in parlance. People would respond. People would actually just respond and say, what's up? What do you need? So we had a deliberate intention to start Meter. We came to San Francisco. We met a bunch of people that today we end up working with, and it's an incredible thing that all of them were just open to talking to us. But as we started Meter, for context, Meter is a hardware software operations company. We're entirely vertically integrated. What we do is make it easy for anybody to get internet infrastructure. And part of that, what we build is routing, switching, wireless hardware. And as we came to SF and we kind of tried to learn how other people build things at scale, then we just said, okay, it's time to kind of just get started on Meter. And we started building a lot of the operating systems. And one of the fundamental bottlenecks was the fact that, you design a PCB or design a new piece of hardware, and it would take months to come back from Asia. And we really just wanted to circumvent and short circuit the amount of time it would take. And we kind of looked around and said, where's the best place in the world for hardware? And especially in 2014, Shenzhen was an incredibly great place. It had gone from 30,000 to 30 million people in 30 years. And the majority of Shenzhen at that time was actually under the age of 40. You couldn't even see an older person while walking around. So we ended up going to Shenzhen to learn how to build hardware. And it was very similar to what we did in San Francisco. We just showed up. We didn't know anybody there. We had never been there. We didn't speak the language. Later on, I ended up picking up Mandarin after living there. Both of us were vegetarian at the time, and it's the best diet program I ever recommend, going to Shenzhen. I think we ended up losing like 15 pounds each. And then it was just like starting to build hardware for meters. So we ended up, cold emailing a bunch of factories and manufacturers and designers to just start building it out. So that's kind of how we ended up in Shenzhen.
Now, this is a very different era, right? Like, obviously, we are in 2024. We are talking in the time of all these real geopolitical tensions between the US and China. But that was a very different era. And I'm curious, what did you observe or learn about how that ecosystem worked, which you think has impacted you later? And there's a second part of this question, because there's been a theme recently that it is going to be hard to replicate some of that culture, that 966 or the work ethic in some way in Western countries. I'd love to get your reaction to that, but also what do you observe that maybe shapes what you do today?
I tend to believe like people in China in individual sense are just incredible. In aggregate, I think there's a lot of issues geopolitically, like you mentioned, but culturally, if you went anywhere else in 2014 or 2015, rest of the world, sort of everybody wanted to be America, right? In the way they spoke, the way they dressed, what music, what film, everything was how to be America. But China, what it felt different was that they wanted to beat America rather than be America. And that felt like a very stark difference. They felt like they had earned the right to compete with the largest economy. And you could feel that energy and fervor. We just want to build things. We know we can build things and we can do it at scale. And in Shenzhen, that culture was ever present. You design something in the morning, and then by night, somebody would run over to your lab saying it's produced. Do you want to test it?
Wow.
It was just beautiful at that time, especially if either of you have been to Huaqiangbei, incredible place. It's like the electronics market in the world. You can literally take a bucket around and buy like memory full of buckets and cameras and other things. It's like a different place. It's cyberpunk to the core.
Yeah.
But that culture was seeped in very deeply in working really hard. But also I think Shenzhen at that time, because like I was mentioning, it was young people, they were all working really hard to send money back to families that lived elsewhere in China. I think that was also a critical thing. Like you actually had a mission, which is you're doing it for your family. That's like the most powerful thing possible. And you had this country that was just getting out and actually having like world-class level, per hour incomes and other things. And I'm not sure about not replicating it. I do think like SF has a lot of that in pockets.
Yeah.
I think India now has that too. Talking to folks in Africa, it feels like that fervor is there. I haven't been to China since the beginning of the pandemic, so I don't know how it's changed in the last 4 years, but it feels like other places have that still.
I'm curious, actually, I wanted to ask you this when you start talking about Meter, which is one of the things that really fascinates me about what you have done with Meter, which we're going to get a bit later, is, okay, let's be blunt. Networking has never been considered the sexiest, most glamorous sector, okay? There have been these waves of technology. Right now, it's AI. You go back several years, it's like, it's the on-demand economy. You get solo-mo. You go through all of that. And, in our adult lifetime, nowhere was, the Time Man of the Year in networking entrepreneur. Now, of course, I'm sort of saying this facetiously because there are these incredible companies, Meraki, etc., which have really pushed the state of the art on networking. What made you and your brother, you come to San Francisco, you're heart of the action. I'm pretty sure people were not talking about how to build networking companies. They were probably talking about Mark Zuckerberg or, who are the hot person of the time was. What made you want to go focus on this?
I definitely think most people thought, what are you even talking about? I think when we said networking, they were talking about like social networking. I don't think they thought about like actual physical computer networking. But a few things kind of that we really care about in our work, and I hope it's part of my work for the rest of my life, which is, one, I think internet is one of the best forces of good we've ever created. We can argue about whether it's in like the top 10 or the top 50 and where is it compared to penicillin and other things, but internet is just good. Just phenomenal thing. Second, we believed we all will use internet more than we currently do, which also felt like a very safe bet to make. And 3, nobody else was working on it, like you said. At one point, Cisco was the largest company in the world. And after that, it just felt like nobody was really learning it and working at it. I was recently mentioning today, if you study computer science at some of the best computer science schools in the United States, I'm not sure what it's like in other places, but you kind of have like one distributed systems class, and maybe networking is covered for like a week, which is absolutely insane and mind-boggling to us because everything in the world is packets, everything. This call that we're doing right now, if somebody's doing WhatsApp, self-driving cars, you mentioned building models and AI, inference and training is entirely networking and it's bottlenecked by networking. I will go so far as saying, I think with the current trajectory, I am more confident even in that stuff. Energy consumption will be solved, but networking has to change before it gets really efficient. So it felt like a very serious bottleneck, felt very important. We thought it would just continue to grow. And we had this particular unique ability of knowing what new technology was and knowing this old alchemy, sort of like, forgotten thing of like building pyramids on how to build networking and like clash it together. And we had particular opinions on how to do it, all the way from the hardware design and up. So that's kind of how we knew that it was the right thing.
I want to maybe try and make this more concrete, because I suspect, and I've learned a little bit about this, and I feel like I have the benefit of doing some homework. But to a observer, they might go, okay, my Wi-Fi router sort of generally works. I have mesh networking. There is an IT team which generally seems to be able to figure it out. Isn't this a solved problem? But I think one, I would love to get you a sense of like what you mean when you say we're going to push this forward. And second, I think that one of the most interesting things you've done is how you architected a modern, forward-thinking company, which I want to get to later around it. But why isn't networking just a solved problem? We're like, hey, Wi-Fi sort of works, network infrastructure works. Why is it not a solved problem?
I think there's like so many layers to that question, but maybe one thing to kind of step back in a larger sense is the fact that it all works is a miracle in the first place. Like the fact that the internet works, it's a bunch of just open protocols. We all said we'll agree and then it'll just work. Then at each layer of the stack, so if you pick routing on how we do routing down to there are ways to make Ethernet better too, that thousands of people are working on as we speak right now. Then how do you do switching? How do you do actual memory and packet movement and packet manipulation? Then even on the wireless side, how do you actually do it in different spectrums and the speed you do it, the power you do it? So I do think things work decently well. They're not utterly as bad as they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. But all the infrastructure we have today as well will not scale to where we think it's going to go in the next 5, 10 years. So every layer of the stack can get better, from Wi-Fi, wired, cellular, data centers, routing, switching, fiber, all of it can get much better. But I do also expect in the next 5 to 10 years, protocols will also change and there will be new things that will come out and there will be protocol level advancements too.
Why do you think that is? You mentioned about like colleges studying, computer science or IT and having maybe 1 week, like one chapter. Like for me, that's how it was. Like distributed systems was like, you took it, but then TCP/IP was like a couple pages. And that was sort of it, right? Like you just like sort of flip through this one chapter. It's like, great, got networking, you get your credits and you move on. Why do you think that is? It's not like there are lots of unsexy problems that we study, we focus on, we do work on. We would have thought assembly language was it. Like this was it, right? Like we don't need to innovate on top of it, but we do keep pushing the boundary there. But why not here? Why not in terms of network and hardware as such?
There are companies that are pushing it, right? We're recording this in October 24.
Yeah.
Broadcom is now larger than Tesla.
True.
And there's some incredible companies like Arista too, what Ulal and Andy Bechtolstein and them are doing, just incredible amount of work to push it. So, but I do think what's happening is One, abstractions have gotten too high. It's the same thing as like operating systems, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's really taught operating systems classes anymore because everybody that does something new, what's the cycle in the world?
Yeah.
So I'll build a new abstraction, I'll write a paper about it, then I'll write a book about it. And if it catches sufficient amount of fire, that'll become popular. Now it'll go into curriculums, and there's only X amount of credits to go fill, and that fills up universities. But if you look at from the beginning itself, there's a great book on universities called Wisdom's Workshop that kind of tracks universities from the beginning. And basically the story is, as any field progresses, it's abstractions that become cool because people want to know new stuff and people want to build on stuff. I think that's one thing that happened with networking. Second, I don't think it's as fast to iterate on networking as it is on like an application. Feedback loops are much tighter. If I'm building an app or doing anything, like I can hit compile and I know if I did right or wrong.
Yeah, and we love the instant gratification.
Yeah. Exactly.
Now, this is the reason I asked that question is because obviously, these networking companies, you guys, but the folks like Broadcom have been around for a very, very long time. Cisco is still a major player. Arista, there's a bunch of others. Palo Alto Networks focusing on security. There's a bunch of others out there. But none of them are going to be the kind of company which takes generative AI and builds a whole new user interface paradigm, which then goes viral on Twitter, which speaks to me about you guys. I think your personal sensibility, your brother's personal sensibility, and the kind of company you've built. So could you talk to us a little bit about what you've been doing there and maybe show us? Because I think what you've done is actually push the state of the art of user interface on AI forward. So I want to really get into that maybe with, like a quick visual also.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to pull that up. I think there's a couple of things that happened for us. Let's imagine model building and progression just pauses entirely. Something happens, it just pauses. It will not get any better than it currently is to whatever parameter count, state-of-the-art count it is today. Even with that, it was clear that at some horizon, software would become something that happened on the fly rather than an artisanal handmade product that it is today. I think people forget, like, software is handmade, literally a handmade product. And anything that's handmade is like fragile, not really scalable, and you can't really customize it for everyone on the fly. So what we've been thinking about is, generally when you build software, you end up building it for a barbell of users. You're either building it for the expert or you're building it for the novice. And you have to pick, and you're taught in product management and other things, pick your ICP, focus on that. Don't really do anything else. Just figure out who you're building for, forget everybody else. Yeah. And in our business, we power internet infrastructure for some of the largest companies in the world and some of the smallest and fastest growing ones that might not have any kind of IT or networking expertise at all. And it just felt like a Faustian bargain having to pick between one or the other. So models were continuing to get better. We had opinions on the fact that, you shouldn't have to choose between experts and novices. And then, particularly in the problems we're trying to solve, we have real-time data. We have actual exact use cases. And I generally have been feeling this for the last few years is this trite way of saying it. We think software should be soft again. And the fact that it should be malleable. And Jeffrey Lidd, bunch of folks have done great work on malleable software. What Brett Victor's doing with Dynamic Land and other things. None of those things seem like are coming into software anymore as the tech industry has gotten bigger, right? And I mean really big. 3 tech companies now are 10% of the entire global stock market. It's ludicrous.
Right.
It's become more cookie cutter, and we're just producing assembly line software. And it was incredulous to us on why is it that you had these great models sitting there and software could be better, but nobody was doing anything. Maybe another way of framing this is, if somebody told us something like GPT-4 would be available in 2014, by 2024, we would say the world would have changed entirely. And today, almost nothing has changed. And that's like another curious thing for us, truly. So what we've been trying to do with the product you're mentioning is called Command. And we had 3 simple goals with it. We're a networking company, and networking and other enterprise products usually end up being about dashboards. You have to build dashboards where people can interact with the infrastructure, make changes, people can look at it, get reports and visuals and all these different things. But how networking started was entirely on the command line. And you had to basically learn each different command line. But the awesome thing about the command line was that it's really fast to get information and really fast to take action. With dashboards, you don't have to remember, 100 different commands, but it's really slow. And if you wanted a particular feature the way you want it to be, you put in a feature request, some PM will pick it up, then some designer, some engineer, then QA. And by the time you get it, it's like 3 to 6 months later. So what we wanted to do with Command is very simple. We wanted to take the best of the dashboards and best of command line and kind of smash it together. So what you can do, and I'll try to quickly share my screen so people have like a visual of what we're trying to say here. We've been thinking about like a particularly entirely new interface for software. Normally our dashboard looks like this. Beautiful software. You can kind of go click through, see different parts of what's happening.
By the way, this is probably one of the few times in history where somebody has looked at a networking dashboard and say, the beauty of this dazzles me. But sorry, let's keep going.
But it does.
Which is actually, I want to make a point here, which is no offense to some of the other networking companies, but when somebody thinks in large enterprise networking company, they don't think we're going to innovate on user interface paradigms.
Totally. I was going to say that, especially for enterprise companies, having worked in a few, dashboards, I think, is important. Like, I know there's going to be a lot of other stuff that we want to do, but it's to me, it is shocking how little effort and art and craft goes into just showcasing what we are doing and whether we are doing it well, and just like looking at dashboards, right? And it's almost always this like outsourced part of this whole business, but everybody looks at it. To me, that is just the most shocking part of it.
For sure. And it should be beautiful. Every part of it should be beautiful. And beauty isn't just like pixels, but like how it works and kind of thing. So this is what you would expect. Dashboards kind of really going into every part of what's going on and all these different things. What we've been thinking about is, what if a user wanted something different than this? And how can we bring the command line to users in a modern way? And where do we think software is going in general? It couldn't be that dashboards are like the pinnacle and the last thing we all build, and this is it. So taking models into consideration, there's a couple of things we wanted to do. One, we wanted to make it really easy for anybody to get information about their network. So we'll see if this works. I'm on our test network. But, you can do something like, and it's networking stuff, but normally people have to like go through and like look at 2 hours of logs and things like that. And, you'll just get an answer back at a particular time and you don't have to do it. But, one of the things we've been really thinking about is a lot of these chat interfaces, they're just text only. Why don't we just do other things in line? So let me see if I can go to a particular client. We'll see if anybody's on the test network. But what will happen that's interesting is, on the fly, Command will actually write software just like an engineer would. And we wanted the software generation to be in line as well. And, it should be like real-time software, like just like, these components should be fully usable, just like anything would. And then the other thing we felt was, most of these interfaces felt too ephemeral. I did something and it was gone, and I didn't have a connection to it at all. And that also felt really weird. There's a bunch of great work that so many people have done over the last 4 or 5 decades on how to make software feel more personal. And one of the ways software feels very personal is when you get to share it with others. And both of you have worked in social networking, so you understand when people get to share, it feels like there's even more. And in particularly networking too, one of the ways I grew up learning networking is you were in a lab, and when you were doing something, somebody else will peer over your shoulder and say, have you tried this and tried that and things like that. So we said, can we take those things, right? Which is something that isn't ephemeral. What if you could just like pick this up and drag it over here? And this should be an entirely multiplayer area. And I think Figma's done an incredible job of building a new paradigm on how performant multiplayer is on the web. I don't think they get enough credit. They're an incredible engineering team. But it was also baffling to us as why is that stuff not used more?
By everyone.
When
I saw the demo that you put out on Twitter, it got me very excited, right? It was like, for years and years, like you said, dashboard was it. Like that was the pinnacle of any sort of innovation with large-scale enterprise businesses. So one, it was like, okay, this totally changes it. But two, this is going to be the future, right? Like this is how I think we are going to think about enterprise software, not just on viewing things, dashboards, that kind of thing, but really how we build software within enterprises, how we want it to be sort of like, to what you said, software being soft and mushy and malleable needs to be like Play-Doh, right? Like you want to be able to do things with it. Your viewpoint, software to you is personalized compared to what other people will get to see. And that I think is what we want to be doing. That needs to be the future. It's just that I think seeing the demo that you had was like the first sort of, this like visibility into that future, which got me very excited.
Yeah, I think, there's a sense when you have a musical artist that they have influences of, and there's the hit song where this song kind of takes inspiration from. So when I look at this, I see, one, obviously how you built this on top of a bunch of models, and I want to get into that, is state of the art, and nobody's done that before. But I can sort of see the lineage of, I would say, Figma, as you mentioned, the notebook style UI of a Jupyter and IPython and all that comes from. But also, and I think you mentioned him, Brett Victor, and the idea of having these direct interfaces. Like if you go to his website, he has these like little cars which you can drive around. And I see, like a song bring to multiple influences. You bringing this together here. I guess talk to us about how this works under the hood, right? Like so, when you are writing this piece of code, I assume it's spitting out the version of some really fancy shell script that a bearded network engineer knows to write.
We took a little bit of a different approach. One of the ways that we've been really thinking about is, our ambitions for Meter are that if there is a packet moving in the world, we want it to move through Meter hardware and software. And over the next year or two, people will really get to see what that means and, how far we're willing to go for every single packet to be ours. And so what we started a couple of years ago, and all the credit goes to our engineering team and teams at Meter, is really thinking about how can we virtualize everything down to the port in the backend. And then we have real-time data streaming in from every piece of hardware that's everywhere, that's Meter hardware. So counterintuitively, when somebody types something, it's actually just getting translated to how that hardware is virtualized. And then these models that we ended up building are just like small models, because we believe that in enterprises, you actually don't want creativity. Accuracy matters a lot more, right? Nobody ever said, I want my enterprise software to like make shit up. That's not how it's going to kind of work. And then so they really know how we write software, how we design software, but also how our hardware is built, the architecture, and what our backend is like. So you've got models that are writing queries against that, virtual backend that we have that's for every single port of hardware. Then another part of the system that actually writes the software. And as it comes in, one of the really interesting parts about the architecture is it's all real-time data. Everything that I showed you is literally being pulled in real time from a piece of hardware somewhere in the world. And what we wanted users to be able to do is, one, get information really fast. Two, take action really fast. and 3, have software written for them just the way they like it. And in that canvas I showed, multiple people can work together at the exact same time. You can all pull in different components that are generated for you, and voila, you now have a dashboard that's yours, how you built it. And so our main points were really, again, pushing towards what does software look like 5 or 10 years from now? And it felt like we can do a lot of it today, or at least get started on it. There's a lot more that we want to do with Command, but it's like a good start.
Extrapolating a little bit from what you're talking about and what else is happening, I do think so much of SaaS software today is there is an API around maybe a data store or an interface, and which requires a bunch of schlepping, to use the Stripe brothers phrase. And then you construct, and I don't mean this in sort of underplay how much effort it takes, but you build a bunch of knobs and dials on top of it. And that's a lot of the value add. What I think you're showing here, and I would say if you look at, say, Claude's artifacts, or what GPT is now doing with Canvas, is a sense of, okay, you can create software on the fly, and it just exists only because you asked for that in that particular context. And where do you think this heads in terms of user interface design? Like, what does a Salesforce.com in a 2027 context, or I don't know, Atlassian, or pick your favorite SaaS dashboard? What do you think this all looks like in 3-4 years down the road?
Yeah, I have pretty strong opinions on this, but there's kind of 2 paths here. One is if we won't have another order of magnitude improvement in models as far as parameter count, capabilities. Second is if we do. So maybe we can talk about the more exciting one, which is like, let's say, you said 2027. Let's say we get another turn at this and models get 10x bigger. I just don't see how, unless you control the data and the pipeline yourself, that there's going to be any value for software companies at all. It will feel like there's a blip of 20, 25 years where software reigns supreme. I just don't see how that's possible anymore. Already what's possible with models and other things, if you push it to be 10x larger, let's say it's because of synthetic data, it's because of new algorithms or new architecture, where I see it all going is, all 3 of us are sufficiently old enough. So when we used to sign up for services, maybe not sure, me and you are. When we used to sign up for software in 2004, 2005, 2006, they used to ask about who you are, right? They would say, tell us where you live, what do you like, and all this stuff. And they would try to customize it a little bit. But if you see what's happening with software these days, that doesn't happen anymore. Nobody actually asks you who you are. And nobody actually tries to figure out what your kind of flavor and profile is of person. I actually think that will come back. And all it will take is to just understand a person's preferences. And then software is just made for them entirely on the fly for whatever they're trying to do. And that could be any sort of thing underneath. That could be CRM to HR, could be finances, anything. I think it will matter more on the user rather than the system of record, which is what it's been the last few years. The web, and we plan on pushing this too, which is even with Command, what we want to do is actually understand the user deeply and put that into context of the models and other things to really take it further. But I think that will happen really at a large scale. That personalization of software will actually happen, which we all tried in the early 2000s. It just didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, think about agi.emacs.d or .vimrc. One of the things when I was watching you today and the demo is it strikes me that we might be on the edge, but still missing the actual metaphor for interacting with these models, because there is the REPL and there is sort of the power of the feedback loop of the REPL, and which in this case is also helping, in some RLHF style mechanism, tell the model what you're doing, and you're kind of working hand in hand. That's in the text interface. Now, of course, as I'm saying this, advanced voice mode on GPT-4o just rolled out to everybody, and that's carrying it out in a, like a regular human conversation. But it does strike me as, I think you're absolutely correct, where we could have personalized software, but we still have to figure out what the interface paradigm is, where you're interacting with a ridiculously smart, intelligent piece of model weights. But you and that have to work together. And I think what you built is one of the few things I've seen, which is trying to really push at that, which is why I think it's really interesting.
You're actually, I think both of you mentioned this. We had the idea for command in this interface maybe about a year and a half ago. We had a bunch of work to do on our end about building out the architecture, the data pipelines to do it entirely with real-time data. And we had assumed somebody else would do it. And we had already been testing this even before artifacts and other things came out. But when we released Command, I think one of the most surprising things was, yes, we knew that people would like it because we had been showing it to a lot of people, even folks we all know that build cutting-edge software in the world. But the amount of kind of adulation Command got surprised even us. Basically, all the messages we ended up getting is, this feels like the future of software. And you guys are a networking company. What the hell are you doing inventing this? Those are the two things consistently we heard over and over again. But it has been surprising to me in general, with the amount of capital and talent that's been going into this field the last 3-4 years, how little we have to show for it as far as what could be the future, if you will.
Actually, that is let's ask you that question. You guys are a networking company, right? Like, I don't expect, no offense to say anybody from Broadcom watching, somebody from Broadcom to maybe be up there to win the Apple Design Awards or help, bring Brett Victor's ideas to life. So why is Meter doing this? And there's a multiple, but why are you guys doing this?
Alan Kay had this really great quote that Jobs used to use a lot too, which was from a great essay Kay wrote in the late 80s. People that care about software build their own hardware. And we have two versions of that ourselves, which is we believe people that build the hardware should be the ones responsible for it. And if you have the hardware, you better make better software than anybody else. And I think we're in this luxurious position where we control the entire stack ourselves. And we always have. Yeah. And Meter is not just a company that builds routing, switching, wireless, but we're the company that deploys it and maintains it too. So we deeply feel the pain because if the software sucks or the hardware sucks, we're on the hook on making it better. So I think fundamentally, Meter is in the right position because of what we build, because of our business model of entirely being vertically integrated, and having this viewpoint that if you have those things, you can do it. This is why, you mentioned Musk earlier, why Tesla is literally the only company, I think, in the world actually taking action in the real world with models.
Yeah, yeah.
There's nobody else.
Especially after their series of demos a couple of days ago, right? It became even clearer that you being able to have visibility into the hardware and owning the hardware stack, I think gives you enormous sort of authority and power to be able to build on top of it and go up and down the stack, so to speak.
Yeah, and you can control it, right? So let's say you're trying to build something at the highest level of the stack, but you want all the layers below to change something because it will work better. If you're relying on somebody else, you all know how hard it is to work with other companies. Forget working in your own company. Working with other companies is 2 orders of magnitude harder and nothing ever moves. But if you own the thing, you can just change whatever you want from data fidelity, data labeling, APIs, and other things. But I think it comes back to maybe to directly answer your question. I just think we need better software in the world. Yes, pixels have gotten better, design systems have gotten better. We've got React and all these different things that made things better to build. But if you zoom out a little bit, a dashboard that was built or a piece of software that was built in 2010, 2011, other than the pixels themselves, is not that different 15 years later.
Yeah.
And for an industry that prides ourselves in we're pushing things, it's all new, you haven't seen anything like this, it just doesn't compute for us.
But it's similar to what you said about Figma too, right? Until Figma came along and sort of challenged the status quo on design, especially, this multiplayer design. Earlier, again, lots of design companies came in and said, this is the state of the art with respect to prototyping, wireframing. But it was all sort of like nice little cleaned up user interfaces and very incremental with respect to what they shipped. And then Figma came along and said, actually, no, like we are going to change how people think about it, not just designing, but collaboration, FigJam, and everything else. Like this completely changed it. So I think now we are at that moment where we are at the Figma for design, but now in like writing software and programming as such. So I think from here on, this is sort of like the fork in the road where I think you're going to see better and better things happen with respect to software.
I hope so, because so many people have pinged us saying, are you interested in turning Command into a separate company for every piece of software?
Yeah.
And we've gotten so many things about that. We're just like, this shouldn't be stuck with just networking. It should be for like all software. Every software I use kind of thing, it should kind of go. So I am very like hopeful on where this all goes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sort of a pivot in for questions. You talked about talent, and I sort of want to double down on that because I think from what you've written, what you've talked about, talent, whether directly or indirectly, something you cover and focus on quite a bit. How do you find good talent? How do you spot them, fund them? You do a lot of work behind the scenes on this, but how do you find good talent?
Well, I hope you guys haven't found everything. I try to stay behind the shadows as much as possible.
We have our sources.
I wrote this a couple of years ago that got very popular, which is the average age everywhere we do is increasing dramatically. That's good. You kind of accumulate knowledge and you're making decisions with better informed decisions over time. And, you have pattern matching and other things. But the really bad parts are two things. One is the burden of knowledge is increasing. Benjamin Jones and others have written a lot of great papers about this over the years. Matt Clancy, who's an independent researcher now, Matt's written really great things about the burden of knowledge increasing. But, no matter which field you pick, the date or age of first achievement is increasing dramatically. And that's not just true in like science and math, but it's also true in film. It's true in the government. The average age of a congressperson is growing something like 4.5 months every year. The average age of a somebody who runs a university is growing similarly. If you look at the NIH directors or who are PIs at NIH, basically everywhere that we see, people are getting older before they have responsibility. And that could be good. But if you turn back the clock before, it was young people that did all the most impressive things, from Watson and Crick to the Macintosh team. I think the average age was like 23 or 24. Mm-hmm. But the founding fathers. That's what I was going to bring up. Yeah. Founding fathers. That's probably like the best example possible. Mm-hmm. Is Washington was one of the few that was over the age of 30. Yeah. Everybody else was younger. And that's like the greatest founding story possible. And, but I think on the talent side, there's two separate areas to think about. One is how do you evaluate the right talent for you? But also, two, how do you identify young talent that hopefully will get to run the world 5, 10, 15 years from now? And outside of Meter, I spend a lot of time on the former a lot. Mm-hmm. And in that, I believe in the entire approach of outbound rather than inbound. And I just think inbound is wrong for a lot of I'm happy to get into.
Wait, let's maybe break this down. So if I'm getting this correct, you personally, and I might be, maybe, I don't know, revealing something which I haven't talked about, but you personally, I think, been involved in funding a lot of different young people in lots of different ways. How do you set this up? How do you find them? How do you evaluate talent? Just walk us through all your system.
It's very rudimentary, as it should be. So my brother and I have a very simple rule the last decade. If we come across something good on the internet, that might be a YouTube channel, a blog post, podcast, GitHub repo, whatever the case might be. It doesn't really matter how somebody's creating it. And it kind of ties back to why I care about the internet, which is you get to have access into all the nodes in the world very easily compared to before when you didn't. So if we come across this and we think like it's sufficiently interesting work and there's some spark of genius there, and they don't have an audience at all, like, they have low number of subscribers or something. You guys are having me spill all my secrets, but we just send them we just send them an email that's very simple, which is how much money do you need to do this full time for 6 months? And that's the only question we ask.
What is the ROI? Like, what do you think about, or how do you frame like?
I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way at all. I went to this university called George Mason, where I studied networking and economics. Probably one of the most eclectic group of people. You guys know a bunch of them too. Kaplan, Tabarrok, Cowan, Kling, Botke, Hansen, all these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And out of all of them, I think obviously Cowan is the number one kind of pushing person on this for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
And you all probably know this. Cowan had this great short, probably there's 2 essays he's written that are under 1,000 words that I think his best work. One of them is raising the aspirations of other people.
Yes.
That could be one of the highest things you could be doing. Yeah. So, and we had this idea of doing this even before that essay came out, but I do think I got influenced a lot by Cowan and those guys. And my brother went to George Mason too, so there's some sort of germination there. And what I was mentioning before, growing up near HHMI, and whether it's Kay or Donald Braben's work and John Laurinaitis, I might be saying his name wrong. There's this concept that in the world, it's much better to fund people rather than projects.
Yeah.
It's way better to fund people and let them fly. And this is the HHMI's kind of thing too. So I don't really think about an immediate ROI at all. I think of it's like the reason to make capital is to be a sort of a oil for the engine, and the engine is the world, and young people will kind of run the engine, and we can just be like a small lubricant, if you will.
By the way, I have to say, this is the most Tyler Cohen conversation we've had in a while. And that post that you mentioned is probably, it had a huge impact on me, because what you're talking about, where he talks about one of the best thing to do a young person is to basically get them to dream bigger and to show them they're capable of a lot more, as maybe one of the most impactful things you can do. Now, when I was researching this, there have been so many people who had stories about you impacting them. I want to talk about one. Tell us about how you basically made the Dwarkesh Patel podcast happen.
I don't think I did. But by the way, I get way too much credit for this. He I think about is like, he's like Charlie Rose or Oprah Winfrey or Howard Stern of the 90s and early 2000s. And he's got a magic in him that's all him.
Yeah.
But I think what happened is he had written a blog post. I can't even remember if he had already started a podcast or not, but he had written a blog post about Einstein's Year of the Miracles or something like that. It was a long time ago. And he had 1 or 2 posts online, and I had come across it somehow. I can't remember how. And he was still a student at UT studying computer science. Talk about immigration. He was in a precarious situation because he was already over the age of 21. He wasn't even sure if he was going to get a green card to stay in the country, which would have been a travesty for America. That was a whole separate topic. And then I kind of just reached out asking him this question. And to his credit, he tried to lowball me as much as possible. He's like, this is what I'm going to do with the money. I just need like the bare minimum and other things. And I was just like, don't worry about all that. Just tell me. And he's like, do you want to get updates and what I'm doing with the money or doing anything? I'm like, I actually do not. And just do your thing. And then possibly the other thing I tried to do is I was actually, Sriram, just looking at you and I text 3 years ago or 4 years ago. I was like, you need to talk to this kid, Dwarkesh. And you're like, I'll check it out.
Well, and you know what I should have done is I should have been like, if you start a podcast, I want to book out every sponsorship revenue right now at this current price point. Question for you. Do you think the world is better off with Dwarkesh doing a podcast or doing something different?
Oof. Man, what a question. So maybe about a year ago, year and a half, 2 years ago, I had Dwarkesh over for lunch. he was just moving to San Francisco because I was pressuring him to move to San Francisco. I was like, don't live in Austin. You have to come to SF. And he had, I was a good input. I think a bunch of his other friends and other people. And he finally made it over. So when he made it over, my wife and I had him over for dinner. And good dinner, he leaves. And then, I was talking to my wife. I'm like, I don't know if I did the right thing. This guy is like supremely talented. And by the way, the thing about Dwarkesh is the reason he's able to do something as well as he does is he actually understands the things he's talking about. Which seems like a very low bar, but it's a very high bar to understand things deeply. He's actually a gifted engineer from my perspective. So, I was actually lamenting, did I push him to like podcast and media stuff and stop him from starting like a great product in a company or something? And then I used to play the counterfactual to him a lot, which is stop podcasting, go do something better. And to his credit, he would push back hard. He's like, this is the thing. This is why I should do it. But I lamented for a while if I pushed him towards the wrong thing.
I remember Dwarkesh coming home, similar time frame, I think. And Sriram and I were chatting with him and he was recording something. And I looked at him and I was like, so you're moving to San Francisco? He's like, yeah. And what do you plan to do? He's like, podcasting. Like, what? That's not a job. Like in my mind, I'm like, how can you do this for a living? He's like, yeah, I'm just going to like try this out full time. And I look at Sriram, just this panic look on my face. And I look back at it and I'm like, have you had lunch? And he's like, no. Oh, can I order you lunch? And he looks at me and I was like, I'm just going to get you food. And just went on this like full mom mode, just trying to like feed this guy and trying to like make sure that he's not making bad life decisions by just moving to San Francisco to podcast. I'm like, rents are expensive. It's not going to pay you anything. Like you really have to seriously consider your choices here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the takeaway from this is do not listen to our life advice if you're listening to the show. Just for the exact opposite. And by the way, Dwarkesh gave me a lot of the questions that I'm asking you because he had this whole set of things like you need to ask Anil this, and this. Thank you, Dwarkesh. Actually, there's a question from Dwarkesh, which is if you've done several grants. I won't ask you how many, but I know you've done several lots. If you had to pattern match the ones that have worked out, for some definition have worked out, and the ones that have not, what would be the commonalities on either side?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and I don't know if I have a great answer yet. And we haven't done it a lot, by the way. I think we've only done something like 100, 120. So it's not like a massive scale.
That is a lot.
Yeah. Not the scale we want to do it. And maybe I'll come back in like a year or two. I'm working on some other thing that'll be orders of magnitude more ambitious than that. But I think the commonality probably is to the original discussion on like parenting. For a lot of them, they at least had one parent who believed they can do it. And usually what happens is when my brother and I reach out to people, we're the first people generally to say like, you can do this seriously. And it takes them back a little bit too. They're like, what do you mean? For example, somebody we did this with a couple of years ago, I think late 26 actually has a feature film coming out. Because of what the work they've been doing since then. And they didn't take themselves seriously too. They had like the small YouTube channel that we came across and we just emailed them saying, have you considered doing this full time? And they're like, full time? ? That was like the answer. But I think like, generally we're the first people that kind of push them saying, hey, consider doing it full time, things like that. But the kernel, which is probably the biggest problem in the world to solve, is can you give everyone a loving parent and a parent that kind of believes in you? And I think for all of them, there's this like kernel at some point, the parent sees that they can do it, especially when it's a young person, when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I think there's something there. But I don't know if there's like a pattern fully, but that's one I've been extrapolating as I've got to know all these people.
I just think what you're doing is so profound and beautiful. And I know you've been trying to keep it under the radar, and I'm going to try and spoil that because I think it's super impressive. But I think there's a thread to pull on here on young people. If you had to figure out a way to increase the ambition bar for young people, what would that be? And where would moving to SF stack up in the list of things that you would tell them?
I think this SF thing is related to the fact that somehow culturally it's become true that to have an impact, you have to be a founder. And it's actually not that glorious being a founder. I think both of you have been founders. I know Aarthi definitely has. It's brutal. You actually don't want to be a founder. You want to be a founder only if it's like the only way you can do what you want to do. Otherwise, you shouldn't, is the answer. Similarly, I think I'm not convinced SF is for everyone. But what I am fairly convinced of is that agglomeration matters a lot. So whatever people are doing, how do you find your people? And for a lot of young people these days, by the way, it's just on the internet, right? It could be a Discord, it could be something else. You just find your people somehow. But I don't think SF ranks that highly. But probably the highest thing is not waiting. The latest version of this meme is you can just do things. And I think it applies the most to young people than anybody else. The downside risk is actually fairly low. You can just go back, do other things later on. And if I had to like push people's ambitions is maybe take themselves more seriously than they do, because I think young people can actually have like a big change. And then I think actually reading stuff from maybe before what's written this past like 50, 60 years will give a better perspective. And the older literature, when you go read, whether it's like novels or biographies or other things, really pushes the idea that if you're young, you go do something and you have to like get on with your life. And I'd say it's like very simple things. You know, maybe it's the point on Cowan earlier. Cowan had this like really great book on culture in 2000 that nobody reads basically, but it's like a fantastic book.
Trust me, I have no sympathy for Tyler. That he has such a huge audience. It's okay if he has a book no one reads. I'm not shedding tears for you, Tyler.
It's not about Tyler. It's about us not benefiting from reading.
But maybe the most ambitious thing would be is like how can we change it culturally that young people can do things. No, we don't have to. I wish, again, same thing. I have very few novel ideas. And one of them is we should just push young people to do things faster.
Can I ask you maybe a question tying back to the Indian origin story, which is the stereotypical Indian upbringing is you get a good academic grade, you do really well in academics, you pick a safe profession, engineering, being a doctor, lawyer, etc., right? Like if you're in the arts, well, you better not come back home. And then there is almost this slightly risk-averse life path that you're supposed to be on. Now, of course, this is a generalization, and I think often a lot of friends back home have shifted away from that. How do you think what you're talking about? Because I think there's an element of risk-taking and entrepreneurship in there, which is maybe you drop out, maybe you go off, you chart your own course, and you say the downside is low. Like this will not fly with a lot of our relatives back in India, right? They'd be like, turn off that podcast right now. It's a bad influence. But how do you think these cultural themes intersect?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's actually one of the reasons we were so interested in film when we were growing up. Film is like one of the best ways, I think one of the greatest mediums we've ever come across to actually have influence on people. So like, you know, whether it's like tropes on like optimistic sci-fi to actually seeing folks how they build. Film could be one way to change culture. You know,
yes.
I think especially India is so influenced by film. You could point to like any state and have politicians that used to be in film for a particular reason. And that's true in India compared to anywhere else at like a different order of magnitude. So I think film is one way to do it.
Should wealthy Silicon Valley founders and CEOs just be producing movies?
Should be in storytelling, at least in some form.
Well, maybe I'll ask you guys. You guys are like at the forefront of media, right? And you guys are trying to do something new. Do you think that as whatever's happening continues, whether it's on YouTube or podcasts or other things, that culture won't change at a lot of places, even like India?
I'll give you two stories and an opinion. One is I once ran into Michael Douglas at an event. I was talking to him and I talked to him about Wall Street, which I grew up and watching. He told me that to this day, and he's a lot older now, people come up to him and they tell him that I got into finance because of you, right? And he always goes like, Gordon Gekko was a bad guy, right? But there's something about that movie which made people want to get into finance. Same thing, The Social Network, right? Like Aaron Sorkin, right, tried to portray a story of Mark Zuckerberg inventing Facebook just to get good-looking women to like him. Absolutely a lie, right? But in terms of the jokers that are actually on Sorkin, because if you look at the last 15 years, about once a month, I meet a founder who's much younger than me because, they were probably about 15 or 16 when the movie came out. And they saw Social Network and they were like, I want to do that, right? Like, I want to buy that Harvard dorm room and turn it into my, my ping pong table. So I absolutely think storytelling is art of culture. And I've seen this in India where I'm so struck by how many Bollywood movies I see or movies across the board have entrepreneurs as protagonists. I think this is very true. I think this is actually very underappreciated by Silicon Valley. And it's always frustrating to me that we basically outsource the depictions of what we do to a set of people who generally don't like us and filled with disdain. And whenever I see, so for example, a popular show on HBO or wherever. So I think movies and storytelling can absolutely shape culture. And I actually think that one of the ways that we should be investing in folks with the means to do so, and and I think Aarthi and I and a few others are trying to do this, is absolutely produce content which does this, right? What is the modern version of Star Trek which can inspire people? What is the modern version of any inspiring sci-fi or business movie? I absolutely think that's required.
I was going to say this too, right? Like, one of the reasons I think we've been doing this podcast, been doing this for over 3 years. It started out as this, okay, we're on Clubhouse and we want to have this like live audio conversations. But then we quickly realized that, hey, there was, like, to what Sriram said, there was this dearth of people talking about what we do. Like, we, in the sense, like, people in technology, but in a way that is like real, not some like really contrived version. I think at that time, like 10, 12 years ago when I first moved to Silicon Valley and then I went to a different city, people were like, do you write code like in the Matrix? I was like, oh my God, they have no idea what I do. This is bad. They think I'm like Morpheus or something. But then, the other part for us, for B specifically, is I got kind of tired of like the non-optimistic portrayal of technology.
Sure.
And this is whether you think of it as in like journalism, how it is reported, how founders are talked about. I think there is, we could have, technology has given both Sriram and me everything, right? Like this is what we know, this is what we do, this is what we've built our careers on, our lives on, this is how we met. And so for us, it sort of became a second job almost to sort of be this face of optimism, techno-optimistic sort of faces here. And we take this very seriously because I think there is a lot of goodness that comes from people in tech, people working on technology, people building technology products. And I think it's worthwhile spending time telling those stories.
Yes.
I'm not that worried about it anymore, to be honest. Maybe this is counterintuitive, but I think about the same as like policy influence. So 10 years ago, the knock on Silicon Valley was that they know how to build stuff, but they really don't understand DC. They are not going to figure out how to do any work there. A bunch of gray hoodies, and they don't really want to talk to anyone. To now, 10 years later, Silicon Valley is accused of having too much influence in DC. That's the new egg. So I actually think very similarly is going to happen to film and storytelling.
Yeah, our show is supposed to be very optimistic, but let me hate on a particular movie for the next 30 seconds, right? One of the worst movies I saw in this particular context in the last year was Knives Out 2, The Glass Onion, right? Like, if you haven't seen it, trust me, you're not exactly missing out on cinematic history. But, right, like, spoiler alert, the villain of the movie, played by Ed Norton, is a tech billionaire who's kind of loosely modeled on Elon, but a few others, right? But one of the things which strikes you when you watch that movie is that they find it really hard, like Ryan Johnson, the maker, finds it really hard to reconcile why this guy, Ed Norton, is despicable. He's a bad guy, I get it. But he's also built all these companies. So they can't reconcile the achievement with his evilness. So if you actually watch the movie, there's every single time they talk about his company, it's as if he has stolen the idea from someone else. So exactly a sequence where the core idea for the company is like, oh, I actually stole it from somebody else, because it was so hard for them to reconcile this. And I watched this and I said, okay, we in Silicon Valley need to do a better job of telling our own stories, right? Because otherwise, we're going to get these folks hating on us till the end of time. So my hope is for those of you watching this, right? Let's go make something that, makes glass onion, knives out to disappear and we get an optimistic take on technology.
This is personal crusade now. But what I think precisely what you mentioned is that I think the biggest thing that will change over the next decade and why I'm not worried about it is I think it will go from this concept that if you have an idea, that's how things happen. But the way companies are actually built is massive amounts of pain.
Yeah. Grinding.
And you just endure that for a really long time.
Yeah.
So much so that even if somebody told you all the right ideas, you still have to work hard to make it happen. Which I think film has the most amount of power to be able to do that, was to show how that actually happens. Because it's the work is where all the magic is, not in the idea. I do think ideas matter. I'm not in the spectrum of ideas don't matter at all.
I think,
but even with the greatest
exactly.
idea, you still have to do the work.
I said, what about
Wait. I think Paul Graham has this thing where he says, I think in My Batch of YC or something, he said this, where it's like, in movies, you see this montage scene where they're preparing, they're doing stuff, and they're getting, that is the thing. That is the startup building. They sort of skip past that and it's like, hooray, we made it. It's like, no, but that is the part that you're going to be doing for the next decade plus. And I always thought that it was it just stuck with me for a while because it's so true.
Yeah, I always, that's so true. Whenever I talk to movie makers, they're like, oh, what was the drama? I was like, the actual drama was when you have that some person having that aha moment. They were like, wait, say that again. What did you say? Aha, right? And they crack it, right? And they write it on the whiteboard, and then it's boom, 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 and then that is the actual hard shit, okay? That's the Rocky climbing up, running up the stairs moment. But you know what? Can I go back to hating on Knives Out? I ran into Ed Norton at an event, right? And I gave him for 5 minutes the real life version of this, and I'm pretty sure Ed Norton now thinks I'm a total crazy person. So there's some unresolved tension between me and Ed. But moving on.
Which only one person is thinking about at this point. I'm sure Ed's like, who the hell was this random tall Indian guy?
Well, after this, I'm going to go and Google reviews and let the internet know what I thought of that movie. By the way, it's also true. It's the same is true of Blink Twice, which just came out. There's so many of these movies, right? So how many movies have you seen where there's a hoodie-wearing, villain and, who's nerdy, speaks quickly, which, by the way, tells me that movie makers are lazy. Have you seen Mark Zuckerberg these days? That guy looks cool, okay? He has a chain, right? You need to upgrade your wardrobe. But, okay, let's move on. We can maybe edit this whole stuff out, but I feel passionately. Okay, now, I have some rapid-fire questions for you, Anil. Why don't we know how planes fly?
Oof. I think there's engineering challenges. I think there's economic challenges too. At one point, starting an airplane company was the coolest thing in the world. Talking about film, Catch Me If You Can is amazing. Kind of shows a bit of that. And I think it's one of Spielberg's best films.
Actually, wait, do you know something about Catch Me If You Can? Nothing in that movie is true. It's all been proved to be a lie, right? That whole movie is fake.
That's the whole point of the movie, is that you can, just like how the character fakes everybody else, the movie's supposed to fake the audience too. So I think there's engineering things. I just also don't think it's economical to care about it as much anymore. But what's surprising to me is, even given that, we're all okay just getting on a plane all the time and just fly. That speaks to convenience more than anything else, what human nature kind of draws to. And one of the reasons I ended up writing what you're referring to is this was in the midst of all the safety stuff having to do with models and other things. And my point with a lot of the people that actually are building this thing is, I don't think normal people actually care. If it's good, they'll use it. They actually don't care how it works. They just do not. And I was trying to make a point on whether it's planes or chemistry or fire or models or gravity or a bunch of other things. We don't really need to know. Majority of us, if we're not working on something day to day, we are okay just being the consumers of something.
That is true. By the way, the post is, it's at your website, anilv.com/understand. I'll drop a link. And there's a bunch of questions in there, which will, trust me, send you down Wikipedia rabbit holes. For example, I did not realize that we did not know how general anesthesia works, which it slightly scares me. Okay. How did you meet and what have you learned from Sam Hinkie, aka Mr. Process. Trust the process.
I can't remember how we met. It might have been Dan Romero, who was one of the first people I cold emailed maybe 10, 12 years ago at this point.
Nice. Wow.
Dan had this really great blog post about this thing called CJDNS when crypto was just getting started. And DNS is one of the underpinnings of the entire internet infrastructure. And Dan wrote this post about, can you actually make DNS better by actually having it be distributed and all these different things? So it could have been Dan, or it might have been John Collison. I can't remember who. But the things that I learned from Hinkie, I wish he can teach the world how to care about family. I think that's one thing. He has a beautiful family that I really admire, just the way they are and how they function and those things. And Hinkie is okay being wrong for a really long time. And that's an underrated quality. Most people want credit as fast as possible. And there's a lot of benefits for that because you can accumulate and kind of hit the ground running and you hit some escape velocity. But Hinkie's one of the few people that I think is okay being wrong for a really long time, or at least perceived to be wrong from the outside for a really long time. And then I think a lot of people talk about being long-term. This guy's actually long-term. Whatever the meme from Dune is, our plans are measured in centuries. I think it actually applies to Hinkie in a lot of ways.
That is true. Trust the process. For those of you from Philly, what does kindness as an operating principle mean to you?
The best principles are very clear by the antithesis they are. And the antithesis of kindness for me is actually being nice. And I'll give you an example in a workplace. Colleague works really hard for a few months or a few weeks or something, and they're getting ready to ship whatever they're building. But it's not at the quality it should be. The nice thing is to be like, oh man, they worked on it for like 3 months. Yeah. I'm not going to say anything. It's going to shatter them. I'm just going to let them ship it. That's being nice. The kind thing would be to go up to them and say, I think the quality of this is not that good. I think you can do better. Can I help you? And that distinction is really important. Somehow society has veered more towards niceness, but we hope, at least at Meter, we really care more about kindness rather than niceness.
One last of these rapid fire questions, because I think Aarthi wants to ask you something else, but why don't you publish what you write more? Which, by the way, multiple people asked me to ask you.
So, okay, I'm in the spirit of spilling my secrets. I will spill another one today because it's you guys. I just do it under pseudonyms.
Wow. Okay. What?
Right.
This is blowing my mind.
That is a anime PFP avatar I'm following right now, right? Which is actually Anil.
Well, I wish I had that time. I have a newborn at home. I don't have any time for that. But long form over the last decade, yeah, I do publish it. I think maybe I had overestimated all my different identities being in the same place. And I underestimated the benefits of those identities being in the same place. So if I went back in time, I don't think I would do it again, knowing what I know now. Because you mentioned Kwok earlier. He described Twitter and the internet the best way possible for our microcosm, which is tapping the tuning fork and see who it resonates for. That's writing and Twitter and other things. And I think if I had everything under one identity in one place, the volume of my tapping would have been much higher and the inbound would have been great. Some of the greatest people I've ever met in my life that have had a big influence, whether it's authors or research and other things that I'm probably going to work on for decades, have literally just come from something I've written and they just email. And I think I was entirely wrong about that. But I do publish a lot, just not under my real name.
Man, amazing. Thoughts on U.S. immigration?
Oof. Man, we should do a whole episode about this.
I know.
William Kerr, I think he's at Harvard now, probably did some of the best work here. It's the graph that shows the net migration of talent to United States that passes a sufficient bar compared to any other country. And almost any other country has been a net exporter of talent. And for the last few decades, the US has been the only country that's been a net importer of talent. And that is consistently true for a long time. But the real thing about US immigration, if I had time to work on it, which I hope somebody else will pick it up, is there is almost no argument for any type of immigration, barring like criminals and other folks coming in, to be against legalized immigration. For low-skilled labor, high-skilled labor, anything. Even when low-skilled labor enters, we now have sufficient data on how that impacts other families' household incomes positively. When we have higher rate of immigration, because of certain agglomerated ideas, we have better invention and faster, and you can measure it with patents or anything. Immigrants turn out to be much better at starting companies because they're already taking risk by coming to a new country, and they have nothing to lose and they can just go for it. But I think in general, U.S. immigration, we could have like some sort of Matt Iglesias goal of like 1 billion Americans or something, and like work backwards. Like Times Square in Chicago, in San Francisco, the government should like buy out billboards and work backwards from 1 billion to like where we are now, and be like, we have to get to 1 billion Americans. And some number, I'm not saying, and Iglesias has great points on why billion is the right number, and it's a round number, and it's provocative, and all these different things. But in general, I think we should just push as society, as culture, and as citizens, just ask for more net migration, because there's no data and nothing that points to it being bad at all.
I think some of our most popular conversations have been on this topic.
Yeah.
The last time we did one with Didi, we did a couple actually. We probably got hundreds of DMs with some really heartbreaking stories. But that is on the downside. We also got so many DMs and emails on people just needing amazing talent and struggling to get them into the country. And I think about, if America is going to stay competitive and build all the amazing things that we wanted to, it needs to figure this out. And Aarthi and I and others are trying to help behind the scenes in a few ways, which maybe we can chat with you offline.
I mean, I think,
Please, I'd love to.
Yeah, this is something that we care deeply about. I think we were sort of like beneficiaries of the immigration process. We almost got kicked out of the country totally randomly through RFPs and stuff. And so for us, this is sort of we had to pick one fight. This would be it, where we sort of have to bring more, skilled legal immigrants into the country. And
I think just legal immigrants. It doesn't have to be skilled. Literally legal immigration turns out all to be good.
Okay. All right. Now, when we talked about this, you said, right, there's going to be a hostile takeover of the show by you. It's like, so the Aarthi and Sriram show, maybe nothing without its people like OpenAI, but this is your chance, I know.
So maybe first question is, why change the name from Good Time Show to Aarthi and Sriram Show?
Sriram, this is on you.
Good question. So the origin of the Good Time Show is, it's actually due to Aarthi, where one day Clubhouse was the top of the charts, and we always wanted to do something on the media space. We said, okay, let's start hosting a show. But we just had no idea for what a name is. So two things happened. We were trying to figure out how to get across this idea of like optimism and hope, and it's just fun. Second is, we had just seen the Safdie brothers movie, A Good Time, which, by the way, for those of you who actually seen the movie, it's a bit of an ironic title, to put it mildly.
I liked it. I liked it. Sriram did not like it. I spoke to Mark and Teresa. I was like, it wasn't a great movie. I was like, I don't care. This is our show. We're going to call it that.
And honestly, it's one of those things where we didn't have a name. We had to go live. Like, let's stick this, and it stuck, right? And we're off to the races. But about a couple of years ago, we had a chance to do a reboot when we moved the show off Clubhouse into this. And for me, I'm a big fan of pro wrestling. Okay, as is probably well known. And in pro wrestling, one of the hardest things to do is to get yourselves over, right? And what this means in pro wrestling parlance is the crowd reacts to you. They cheer you if you're a good guy. They boo you if you're a heel, a bad guy. And that's sort of like table stakes to be like a really top performer over there. But the really, really hard thing to achieve in pro wrestling, which my friend Triple H will say, is to get people to chant your name. And one of the things that people do is they invent these tricks and ways. Either it's a song or they have a catch line where you are forced to say their name. Because if nothing else, you remember what this person's name is, right? Like, or, for like 30 seconds, okay, this is going to a deep rabbit hole, but one of my favorite stories from Chris Jericho is he was facing this very new and upcoming wrestler called Fandango, and Chris Jericho, a legend, and he was like, oh my God, like the audience wouldn't even know this guy's name that I'm supposed to be facing. How do I get the audience to know his name? So what he would do is he'd go out every single week and you would mispronounce and butcher his name on purpose. He was a bad guy, right? And the crowd will fix it anyway. So I thought we need to get ourselves over. And the simplest way is to use our names, and ta-da! So hence the Aarthi and Sriram show. There you go.
Awesome. What is the best Indian restaurant in London?
I'm not touching this.
Our favorite is Dishoom. I know it's supposed to be the very...
which dish room are you going to? If you could go to only just one.
I mean, we live closer to the one in South Kensington. So the secret is if you live in a specific set of zip codes, Dishoom will home deliver. And so every time we visited, we always stayed in the touristy part of London where they do not home deliver. But then when we actually started living here last year, we opened up Deliveroo and we realized that they actually home deliver Dishoom, which is a horrible thing for health conditions, but great because we now can home deliver Dishoom without having to wait in line.
And do you guys get the secret, whatever the coins are? Do you guys know about the secret coins edition?
I don't think Sriram knows about it, but yes. Where you can like roll the dice and you can
Sriram, what are you doing, man?
Okay, I just want to say two things on this topic. On this show, we have no fear, right? We have said there is no risk in AI, right? Like X risk is a meme. We have talked about Elon Musk and Donald Trump, right? But I am not going to touch this topic of what is the best Indian restaurant in London. Not at all. And also, so I'm staying.
We actually get hate. Like people will leave comments, like 50 comments, being like, "How can you say this? This is the."
That's the reason I'm asking it. That's the reason I'm asking it.
Well, okay. So if you're a London restaurateur watching this and you want us to plug your restaurant, right? Hit us up, right? Like hit us up.
I actually had a chef from one of the other restaurants in London tag me on Instagram and send me a DM being like, "That's because you've never come to my restaurant." And I was like, "Okay, dude, I won't be there."
We're open for an endorsement over here. Yeah,
got it. Sriram, did sneaker culture peak during the pandemic?
Well, I guess the obvious question you would have to ask is how do you measure the influence of sneaker culture? It's hard to judge. I would say one is there are some obvious negative signs, like Nike stock price has gone down super south. Companies, some of the sneaker resellers as companies are not doing really well. Companies like Supreme, which I would say one because some of the streetwear companies were also maybe not as hot as they used to be. Having said that, my perception is this is a bit like hip hop or anything else where it's cyclical. And I think like if you look at, say, this is not exactly classic sneaker culture, but you look at the rise of something like Hoka or On or some of these other brands out there where everywhere I see people wearing those. Or if you look at last year, I really love what Devin Booker is doing with his shoe. And so I think there is a space for us to move away from just yet another Jordan release or yet another signature brand to doing something more creative. But I do agree, it feels like a little bit of a lull. I can't remember the last drop, which made me really get excited, but maybe I'm getting a bit older. Good question.
That's also true. But I guess both of you know a lot of people that are incredibly successful, incredibly wealthy. What's happening that we don't have, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Tatas of the world that are actually having an impact with their capital? What is your take on why are we not seeing Carnegie level libraries everywhere or other things? Whether it's here or in India or anywhere, what has changed culturally? You all know so many successful people. What's going on?
If you question in terms of, say, okay, are wealthy entrepreneurs having impact? I would point to everyone from what Elon is doing to a bunch of others are doing with their companies as maybe the best manifestation of this impact. There are a few other examples. The Collisons are obviously funding several projects, but outside of that, you have people like the Joe Lonsdales funding a university in Texas. But I do think one place which has been lacking, and I don't really know why, is the tech entrepreneurial ecosystem has not really invested in the arts. And so for some reason, and I'm not exactly sure I can articulate why, we haven't seen an opera house funded by, a Silicon Valley CEO. There might be some, so please, if there is one, please come and hate me, or a gallery funded by that. It doesn't seem to be in the phenotype or the interest groups, and I'm not terribly sure why. But I would sort of reject the frame because I think people are having tremendous amounts of impact. And maybe there is a little bit of bias because I would posit some of the folks you're pointing to did some of these statements like things that they did after they were done with company building. A lot of the people that we know are still very much in the peak of their careers and building these amazing institutions.
I think I actually agree with the premise of the question. I think reason you're not seeing it, I think we sort of briefly touched on this before, where we do seem to value instant gratification in different ways. And none of these are instant, build like Rockefellers doing stuff, building libraries. I think we've sort of forgotten that things take time and you have to sort of build for the long term. And by taking away this sort of long-term thinking and approach towards maybe not in my lifetime, but I'm going to sow the seeds and build the foundation, and it'll continue as a project. Some of the biggest monuments all happened like that, where it took hundreds of years.
Right.
People didn't see it as, but it's not going to get done in the next 3 years, so why should I do it? So we do have this sort of corruption of our psyche in terms of short-term thinking. We are having impact with products, to what Sriram said on Elon and everybody else, but I do think the other projects that are not a part of what you do as day-to-day, I think we just stop looking at it as it's too long-term. I don't know if we'll see the benefit of it. So what? Somebody else will do it. It's not my job. Yeah. Not think about long-term projects.
I would say that seems to be like an East Coast versus West Coast difference over here. Because if we look at the East Coast, it is very common to see a typical master of the universe style hedge fund titan go out and sponsor library building, right? I think Steve Schwarzman has done that and others have done that. I don't think you really see that in Silicon Valley, and that may be because Silicon Valley values the building of the new rather than maybe carrying on the old. I want to touch on something else, which is one of the things I think living in London has opened me up to is a real appreciation of history. Because you live here, and one of my favorite things about the city are these little blue plaques that are on various buildings where there's about a couple of hundred of them, I believe. And it tells you this famous person lived here 100 years ago, right? And
it's
it is
very cool. It's very, very cool. We walk by this one pretty often, which is T.S. Eliot. And it's amazing to me that T.S. Eliot used to live here not so long ago in this particular house. I can imagine him eating breakfast and writing things and being maybe I should publish this. But it's incredible to see that.
Yes, and what it leaves me is appreciation of two things. One is just a sense of continuity in history. You're oh my gosh, T.S. Eliot, what have you done with your day, right? There's another part, but there's another part of it which living in London brings you, which I didn't really have in San Francisco, where the idea that some of these institutions have existed for a long time before you, and they're going to exist for a long time after you. I was talking to this trustee of a very, very well-known historic institution which has been around for, several hundred years, right? And they're telling me, look, we are the 50th iteration of some set of people, and there's going to be like hopefully 1,500 more. And our job is to try and make sure like those 1,500 more exist. And that style of thinking is just something I just don't think it's in the water in Silicon Valley. We are so much more fans of like, let's just build something from anew and take over the world. And that's
but also,
amazing.
I think you can't get one without the other. I think that's sort of the thing. I think the reason why Silicon Valley is so special and has all these people is it's also this sort of rejection of all these norms and people.
That's true.
And sort of this like, I think when we first moved to San Francisco, I'm like, we used to be like, this is like Mad Max, it's like, you sort of like keep going in this dusty desert, in this rickety bus. And, every once in a while there is a passerby and you're like, do you want to hop on? And you just throw this thing out and they just like jump onto this and you keep going. No one questions where you're really going. You're just going really fast. And you sort of have to have this like rejection of everything else to be able to do what you're doing in San Francisco. And that's also what makes it really magical and special, because the whole bunch of people who sort of believe in themselves, have this confidence, and are completely okay with rejecting everything else outside of them.
Sriram, you still have sriram.eth in your name, even after it's become like not in vogue anymore. What do people not get about crypto that you get still?
It's a good question. sriramk.eth, by the way. And I hope I got this spelling right. I would say a couple of things. Right? That crypto is, it's going back to a point about history. I think crypto is a spiritual successor to so many things that came before it, to open source, to cyberpunk culture, to those of us in the early 2000s who would add here's your private key and, please, encrypt things back and forth to me, that culture. And so many of those strands led to crypto. And I think of it as sort of the ultimate manifestation of what the internet should be architecturally, where you have governance and the economics being pushed to the end. Now, are we in one of the cycles where the numbers are low? Absolutely. But I do think in some ways this is the manifest destiny of the internet to go get there. And the alternative, if we don't get there, is one where a few large entities in some shape or form, be it the governments, be it the corporations, wind up controlling our destiny, which is not, I think, what any of us would want to sign up for. So yes, I am, I still have sriramk.eth in my Twitter profile. It's going to be around for a long time.
But both of you, to our point earlier, are working on what is new media. And one of the points about that everybody says now is go direct. With everybody going direct these days, is now the best time to go back to old media if you want to have more kind of access, more distribution? Is going direct like where everybody's going? You have to go to the other way now.
Do you want to go or should I go?
Yeah, I'll go. I mean,
Yeah.
I actually don't think going direct is for everyone. I think the whole go direct thing came because of a few reasons, right? One, it felt like people who were telling the stories were not painting an accurate picture of what was actually going on. So even in some cases, when you would do press interviews, talk about launching a feature functionality, some event thing, it would almost always get written as something else. Or portrayed in this like spin of like they're doing this because of this other ulterior motive. And we saw so many of these, right? And us, like having worked in these companies, building these products, I saw this sort of firsthand at working at Facebook. And you realize that there's no such thing. Like we didn't think through this like super villainous way of doing things, And so I think at some point people sort of got frustrated and said, you know what, I'm just going to go direct, which is okay. But I think going direct also means the reason why this whole non-going direct thing works is there's one source of distribution, which means there is this much larger audience that you would get. You can go reach them. You can go find cohorts of people you need to go talk to, all of that. Going direct means everybody has to now build a distribution system and everybody sort of has to figure that out. And I think that is a challenge. And now everyone's got to go full stack, like build the whole thing into it. I just don't think that is sustainable or scalable. Not everybody should be doing it. But, if you think about like a Zuckerberg or an Elon Musk, it makes total sense because I think they're in the past, they've had issues with that, right? Like they've been sort of misunderstood, misconstrued, all of that. But if you're a small startup, you should do the most pragmatic thing. You should find a way to like get the best distribution, no matter what that is. And And I don't know if you should just take what everybody else says and do that.
I think you hit the nail on the head on 2 points. One is, I think it's a reflection of the war between the people who cover the tech industry and some of the people in the tech industry itself. Second is, if you choose to go direct, what you're actually saying is like, okay, I'm going to produce content on the internet, which has to fight for attention and fight for my audience. And I have to treat it as a core competency for my company, on top of everything else my company or my person is actually doing, right? And maybe that's for you, maybe that's not for you. I find the whole thing very reductive. I know where it comes from. I'm a big supporter. Just yesterday we had TechCrunch hating on Elon's idea of building robots. It's pretty frustrating, right? So I totally get the idea of like the gatekeepers being frustrating. Having said that, I would love to see a couple of things, right? One is a lot more different kinds of craft and modality in how you tell your story. For example, when people say going direct, what they're actually usually talking about is, I'm going to write a multi-format expost and maybe a little video, right? I think there are so many other ways of doing such a thing. Like, for example, it's been close to 20 years, but I still remember Google Chrome when it came out, it had a comic book, right? I'm not sure whether you remember that, right? Like a classic comic book. When Square first came out, Adam Lisagor, who was the voice of Silicon Valley startups for quite a while, and maybe still is, right? Like he had the voice, he would talk about Square. And so one is, I worry that going direct has taken away a lot of the creativity in terms of how you want to tell your story visually in a visual medium and a written medium. The second part of it is, I actually think that it downplays the impact of curation and other creators. Like, for example, one of the things that Aarthi and I do on our show is, you could, do this exact video by yourself, but we can hopefully get a different version out of you. And if you went on, say, I don't know, like Larry King when he was alive, or Oprah, they're going to get a very different version out of you. And that version would not exist if you were just talking to the camera, right? Like, so for example, I always think about some of my favorite New Yorker style articles. Like, that is not going to be replicated by a tweet storm. That can be replicated by other means. And so I'm a big fan of going direct. I'm really frustrated with the gatekeepers who hate on technology. I worry that people underestimate the amount of effort it takes to create great content. We do this all the time, and build an audience as a core competency. And finally, I worry that it takes a lot of the creativity of getting your story across in the best form possible. So, but yeah.
Do either of you think you're too online?
Not me.
No, I don't think so. Why? Has anybody told you otherwise? No, I mean, I can't. I was telling somebody else this. I can't remember the last time I went for a full day without internet. It just has not happened. I think Sriram actually tried. I think Sriram...
I can't imagine him surviving. What happened?
No, I can't.
He did it. You did it for 2.5 days or something like that.
Wow.
It was insane.
I'm impressed, Sriram.
Yes, I after the 2.5 days, have you read Anathema by Neil Stephenson?
Yeah.
Right. So I was like, what has happened to civilization? Is his food still a thing? Wow.
No, but I would sit right next to him and be texting, and he'd be like, is anything happening? And I'm like, I don't want to know. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, if you need to get online, you should. And he lasted for 2.5 days. I didn't. I didn't even bother competing.
I think the part which I struggle with, like a lot of other people, is since I think Anil knows me a little bit, and I am on every messaging medium responding instantly, is that it is so easy to get sucked into what other people want out of you and not be able to do real deep work. And I think the worst problem is you can get a very fake sense of productivity where you're responding to a bunch of things, you're doing a bunch of things, but if you look at it over a long period of time, you may not have actually accomplished something very meaningful. But this is sort of thing where I worry about it, but then I go back and my screen time keeps going up, and so I'm not fixing it.
We do like to make fun of Europeans. When we first moved here last year, we would get these out of office notes being like, we are on holiday, not checking anything. And I'm like, you have internet where you go, you have phones, how can you not check stuff? But it is a thing, apparently. So
that was going to be my follow-up question, Sriram. I think you are one of the reasons group chats have gotten so big in Silicon Valley. Do you think you've hurt productivity for everyone by the amount of pings everybody gets?
I've got this from multiple people. Yes, but it is worth it because it is entertaining and fun. And, so what if, your next AI breakthrough is delayed by a year or so? It's worth getting on the gossip. But no,
I think
we know
whoever
who's
says
right.
otherwise gets kicked out of these groups. Like, you know who they are.
that is true. That is true.
What would it take for you guys to move to India? What would have to be true?
Oh, we will actually do it at some point in our lives. I mean, one, I think about growing up in India, and I think it's a very different experience, and I feel like our kids don't have that. And we want to go back. My parents are getting old, so we want to basically like have them have some consistent amount of time being there. We don't know when that is going to be, but we do want to go to India and live there for a bit.
Both of you worked on so many different products. Was there something you both were like sure is going to be successful and it didn't pan out to be? Like you were absolutely sure. You're just like, this is going to be successful. I know it will be. And, gets to market or gets to customers and just doesn't have the impact you thought it would have.
Yeah, I have a bunch. I have a lot of time. You go.
I would say the one that I worked on for a long time was, do you remember what Yahoo Pikes was?
Oh, yeah.
Right. I think there was an era for those of you younguns listening to this where in 2004, Gmail blew everyone's mind with the Gmail UI because one, it gave you 1 gigabyte, but second was it used Ajax, XML HTTP request for the first time, where you click on something and the page wouldn't reload, right? And we were like, oh my God, we discovered fire and now we have instant, pages reloading. Oh my, what is humanity going to do next? But it blew our minds. And so there was this era from 2004, I would say to roughly 2009, 2010, where this was the age of mashups, right? And Yahoo Pipes, and I worked on a competitor called Microsoft Popfly for a little brief period of time. But the idea was you would take this open API from, say, Flickr, you would stitch it together on Google Maps. And the idea was that this data would just kind of flow all over the internet, and you could stitch together these websites like a little bit of programming building blocks. And I would say few things. One, that didn't work out for a few reasons. I would say, one, the rise of Facebook and walled gardens, the rise of the advertising as the dominant way to monetize these products, really destroyed that whole ecosystem. Zapier may be the only company which has really lasted from doing that. It's interesting to think about that now because in 2024, we might now, with agentic applications, may have a shot where maybe what we were lacking then is the right programming metaphor or the right smart agent to do the stitching together for us, and that's what it's doing. Of course, the question of how do you monetize this is still TBD. But I was so sure in 2005 that, mashups was going to be a thing. Didn't really turn out to be a thing. Aarthi, what about you?
Man, I was thinking, I don't know. Kinect was, I think, one of the early ones.
Oh, yes.
Kinect was this product from Microsoft Xbox where it was sort of this competitor to Wii, but without a handheld controller. It would do motion sensing, and you can do gaming and huge push. I mean, I worked on the loader binder compiler SDK, like the very low level parts of it. So I didn't work on any of the sexy, cool parts of it. But it was like, even going through the motions of shipping that software, it felt so dramatically different from anything else that had been on the market. And I was very sure that this was it. Like we'd crack something in how normal people are going to game and interact with systems, with computers, and like game against each other, play against each other. But it never really took off after like that first initial burst of momentum. And I think a lot of it comes down to having good games. I think when later on with Oculus and everything else too, you sort of see that where you have to have good content libraries, game libraries to be able to bootstrap these to sustain the momentum. But technology was way ahead of the curve, but everything else didn't quite follow through, like building the platform and ecosystem around it. Netflix, I think Netflix 3D, nobody knows about this, but...
Oh, I didn't even know this existed.
Yeah. So it was one CES where I went and begged a bunch of 3D TV manufacturers to let me go build Netflix 3D, where you have to do left eye, right eye encoding, like you have to delay it just a little bit. And so we built this and got got 7 movie titles licensed to be able to play it. And people were like, yeah, this is not a thing. Like, don't waste your time. So it didn't even launch. That was how much of a flop it was. But we ended up learning. Again, I worked on like the Netflix SDK. The company is moving from DVD into streaming. So my job was to build the streaming player software. So 3D was very much like an afterthought. It's like, let's try it. But very, very few consumers actually had 3D TVs at home. So it didn't even make sense.
Aarthi, do you want to describe the story of Netflix and Quickster and the blue teal shirt?
No, I do not. I do not. Watch SNL. It's still there. It's still live. So
Come on, give us a little bit. Like, what happened there?
This is 13, 14 years ago. So Netflix had the DVD side, also had the streaming side. Netflix was a big company, public company, but known mostly for streaming, for DVDs, the red envelopes that people got in their houses. Biggest competitor there was Blockbuster, not really the streaming side of things. And then I think Reed had this sort of, initially he said, we should have this hardware device, which I'm going to build, and we are going to do streaming in this hardware device, and that's how it's going to be. And then last minute, like literally I think a month or two before launch of this device, he basically said, actually, every device should be a Netflix device. I reject this notion of the single device. And sort of said, internet's going to catch up. We're going to have better streaming capability. We should just make every device a streaming device. And sort of spins off this company into Roku, which is a different public company now. And my job at that time I joined was to build the SDK that goes into TVs and set-top boxes and Blu-ray players. And figure out runtimes for each one of these and how do you ship for them, right? But then they had this decision point on what do we do with this DVD business. And at that time, I think one morning, Reed basically says, again, classic Reed, was like, I'm going to spin this into a different company, and that company is going to be called Quickster. None of us had heard of this name. We were like, what is going on? There was this guy on Twitter who had this handle @Quickster. And turns out that he was just like some random guy, and people were like telling him, hold on to this Twitter handle. People are going to give you millions of dollars because Reed has now made this his company name. And I look over at Netflix at the time, it's very small, I think 70 engineers or something, even for a public company. And I look around from my first floor, second floor office or the cafeteria downstairs, and there is Reed sitting there, couple of mics in this like corridor, wearing this teal shirt, now famous teal shirt, doing this interview, basically saying we are breaking this company into 2 companies. The Netflix is the streaming business, and the old thing is the Quickster. And we all were like, what just happened here? And the stock price tanked so much, it nearly killed the business for no reason, just with a press announcement. It was crazy. But Reed, to his credit, 3 months later, so Netflix has this culture of, I loved the culture of Netflix because they take movies very seriously. And every 3 months, we used to do this all hands meeting, but they would bus us over into this movie theater and rent the whole place for the day and just do this all hands. And every quarter, we had to choose a movie that depicted how this quarter had gone. But that quarter, the thing that showed up on the screen was the Comeback Kids, because we had somehow survived this whole adversity, and the whole place, like, it just broke out into this applause for like a few minutes. And it was so emotional for all of us because we had actually like come through this really hard time for the business, all because of this one press announcement. Yeah. And Reed was very emotional as well. It was great.
Amazing.
Yeah. By the way, can I add, sorry, I know we're going super long, but I want to add one more technology which I believed in, which failed. There's a lot of these, right? ActiveX.
That's a deep cut.
Deep cut, right? Like, all right, like, only the OGs will understand this reference. But for you young ones, right, like back in the 90s, Microsoft had huge envy of Java, right? Like Java was going to be this huge programming language. And one of the key things Java had going for it was this thing called the applet, which was this piece of software which in theory you could embed and it would run as a program inside a web browser. And the idea was like, hey, Sun was saying like, hey, who needs desktop software, right? Like, and who needs Microsoft? And Sun can rule the world. Spoiler alert, they did not. They destroyed themselves. But that's a story for another day. But applets, which actually was a terrible technology because you just spent several minutes waiting for the Java runtime to load, generated so much envy that Microsoft's like, hey, we need our version, right? So they basically invented the standard called ActiveX, which basically was a way where you could take theoretically any piece of code and run it inside your program. So you could be like, okay, here's my Word document, but I'm going to, because I'm feeling a bit crazy, I'm going to stick my Word document into my Excel spreadsheet, and who can stop me now, right? Like a little bit like the demo Anil did like 2 hours ago, except that it didn't work. It sucked. It was incredibly complicated, had a million different security issues, and ultimately, I think it's probably lingering around in some way, which is generating 0 days every few weeks or something, right? But ultimately died. But okay, sorry, next question.
Okay. So I have 3 last questions. Both of you were at Microsoft, I think, right? I remember correctly. If I talked about Microsoft with both of you, did you imagine Microsoft to be this successful? Because there was a point in time, people gave up.
Let me just stop you. Absolutely not. Because when I left Microsoft, I was like, the stock is not going up at all. I am going to sell everything right now. That is the end of Microsoft. Funny enough, I was talking to I don't want to name this person. He's a very, very, let's say a very, very well-known person in our world. And he's made a lot of money investing. But he told me, you know what? I could just kept my Microsoft stock and I've done so well. So I would say, no, look, I think the serious version of the question is, we left Microsoft in 2011. I think Aarthi left slightly after I did. That was a very different Microsoft, right? Microsoft had missed the search era. It had obviously missed the mobile era, right? Like Windows Phone wasn't exactly, setting anyone on fire. People were not standing in line for the brown Zune. Another deep cut reference, by the way.
I love Zune. Speak for yourselves.
Okay, I have a story about the brown Zune, by the way. Right, for those of you who haven't heard, just Google it. I heard this, one of my friends got his car broken into in San Francisco around that time, and the thieves took everything, but they left the brown Zune. Right, anyway, nobody wanted to squirt with their Zune. So if you understand the reference, drop it in the comments. But there was a sense of glory days of Microsoft are behind us, right? And I remember in the last few weeks at the company, Satya, who was sort of a senior executive but not CEO, he actually tried to talk us out of leaving. But I remember telling him, I was like, no, there's no future here. I just want to go to Silicon Valley and do something else. So I just want to say how much credit Satya deserves for turning that around in so many ways, removing Windows as the focus of the company, really embracing the cloud, making incredible acquisitions like getting GitHub, getting NAT, and so many moves, because that was not expected at all. But I don't know, Aarthi probably...
maybe one question there is, are there a lot more companies like that if the right Satya were there, the outcomes would be different?
I think so. I'd like to think so. I think a lot of it is, my hot take is a lot of these companies in the last 10 years in the ZIRP era, we have execs who are just LARPing. They're not meant to be execs at these companies. They sort of look at it as this sort of stereotypical, this is what we do. We performance manage, we do this thing. It's very much like gameplay. And we need to have more people who will actually, to what the term you'd said before is go do shit. Actually go, take some bold moves, ship some software, do things that are not just what is expected of an exec as such. And I think we are going to have this, we are already seeing a lot of these, these big exec roles, having this time of reckoning there. And I think that's actually a good thing where, you're going to have to see, there is going to be a more positive shift there. And I would like to think that some of these companies, if they're run well and have the right leaders in place, you will see them do really amazing things.
Yeah. I was hoping that Aarthi would list out all the execs by name that she thought was LARPing, but we did not get there. Maybe for paying subscribers later.
If there's a nonfiction topic, could be a company, could be an organization, anything, that you could apply a great author to write a book for both of you, what book doesn't exist that both of you want? It could be on company, topic, organization, anything. Nonfiction, not fiction.
When do you go first?
Oh man, it's a good question.
I think this is going to be an obvious answer for people who know me, but I would say professional wrestling is dramatically underappreciated as an art form, as the impact it has on popular culture, as a way to understand storytelling and character, and also the fact that it by itself, it has these huge, crazy, larger-than-life characters, huge, crazy, real-life storylines, where the reality is way more dramatic and unbelievable than anything which happens on TV. And I also think it's shaped American politics. Kayfabe and comes from WWE. The art of cutting a promo comes from professional wrestling. So I think there's a deep impact on American culture. It is very Americana in a very, very deep way. And I still think it's underappreciated. And I would love to see a serious writer actually go really dig into it.
Okay, I don't know. I think I like some of the Bollywood movies. I think we talked about how we are now talking more about entrepreneurship. I think one of the movies that started doing that was Guru, sort of like touching on Dhirubhai Ambani and building off of his backstory. But we really haven't seen like a proper biopic, like actual collective material on how do these people do what they did, especially for Dhirubhai Ambani. Like, I just don't think we've seen a lot there. But, and maybe it's like the state that we are in, there's just like a lot of politics and, disagreements on how things exactly happen. I don't know why, but I think there should be more people telling stories of entrepreneurs, especially in India where, I think when we grew up in India, it was a very different time. Like, entrepreneurship was not something that you could go out and say, I'm starting this company. People will be like, okay, but what do you actually do? Like, what's your job? Now I think it's become more accepted, and I think we need to be telling more stories.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking of working on a long-term project, maybe a book around this, where we really dig into how founders today actually operate. Because I feel like a lot of storytelling around founders kind of slips into, we're launching something, or there's a press profile piece, or it is sort of the story or the arc of the company's formation. I'm very curious in how does the regular CEO that you and I might admire, how do they make decisions? How do they spend Monday mornings? How do they handle hirings and firings? How do they think about motivating people? There's a lot of stuff in there. So I'm thinking of working on such a project. I'm talking to a few people, but that's something I think which is massively undercovered still.
Okay, last question for both of you. Which movie that's an Indian movie that came out before 2000 and could be any Indian language that everybody should watch?
I mean, even a non-Indian audience should watch?
Yeah, everyone.
Yeah, one of my favorite is this Tamil movie. It's called Iruvar, and it didn't do very well.
Of course. Rahman's best work, I think, to date.
I think so too. Arguably his best work. And also,
the background score, I think, is one of the most gifted things he's ever done for Iruvar. It's incredible.
Absolutely.
And Sriram is just God in that.
Yes, fantastic. I mean, all across the board, like the talent, like the acting, music, everything, cinematography. I think it's such a good movie that it didn't do well commercially. Sure. But once every few years, I would go back and watch it, and it's just sort of deeply inspiring. It's like, it's a real life story, but it's sort of like made into a movie. So it's like, it dramatized a bit, but I really like that movie.
Yeah. By the way, I didn't think we were going to mention Rahman on this episode, so that's amazing. I would say if I have to pick one, it might be an obvious one, but I'm going to pick Indian, which is sort of the classic Kamal Haasan movies. I forget which year, maybe it's like early 90s, which came out. And the reason...
95.
Yeah. And so just for those of you who may not be from India, who may not know the movie, the basic construct of it is there is it's basically about corruption in India and the fight against it. And you have the lead protagonist wind up having to fight corruption, basically assuming this sort of mercenary role. And eventually, it's a bit of a spoiler, but it turns out that he will run into his own son who actually would be corrupt, and what happens over there. And now, if I think about it as I get older, and I try and deconstruct stories, like there are so many easier ways that are done the movie. If you watch the movie, the fact that it overlays India's freedom struggle and that arc in there, it overlays the, sort of the real tragedy of like some of the cost of not giving into corruption and sticking to principles where his daughter, would suffer the consequences all the way leading to the end, right? Like this movie could have been easily not done with so much craft and so much design and wouldn't have had the impact that it has. I was just recently thinking about it because Aarthi and I were watching this new Netflix movie called Rebel Rich. It's kind of like a fun action movie. It may not be an all-time classic, but still a fun movie. But I was thinking, but it's about like somebody showing up at a town and fighting corruption. And I was thinking about like how much Indian got so many elements so right in a way where it's, I would say it's a timeless classic. So if you haven't seen it, 90s movie, go watch Indian. I think it's like, it introduces you to so much parts of Indian culture.
For sure. Peak Shankar. Thank you both for answering my questions.
Oh my God. Wow. Have you considered a career in podcasting? You are so good at this. So you should just join us. We can call it the Aarthi, Sriram and Anil show.
I like asking questions more than answering questions.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for the questions. They were delightful. And we might need to follow up with that. But thank you for coming on the show. I sort of feel you've just done so many incredible, amazing things. But I almost feel like Silicon Valley or the world outside Silicon Valley hasn't discovered you yet. And that's going to very, very rapidly change. So I want to, this is basically us leading the seed round of Anil's, coming out and becoming famous party. But I would say what we want to do in this episode is not just talk about you as a founder, right? Like fact that you and your brother built an enterprise company, which is just on the cutting edge of design. And that comes from so much taste, as the callers say. The fact that you've been funding all of these young people and have dramatically changed their lives and so much more that I know you're doing behind the scenes. I think you're one of a kind. I'm so happy you finally agreed to do this after 5 years. Hopefully it won't take 5 more years for you to come back to this again, but this was such a delight for us.
I had a lot of fun. Thank you guys for doing it.